Alright, so the first recording somehow deleted the first 11 minutes of it, so we're going to try again. Okay, this is Robert Thier's Storm and Silence, Chapter 7, which is called File Fight. Excuse me. Mr. Stone looked up from his desk, and his eyes widened. I would like to see Mr. Ambrose, please. I have an appointment. Mr. Stone blinked, sat motionless for a few seconds, and blinked again. Only then did he recover from his astonishment. I'm sorry, sir. Of course. I was only distracted for a moment because just half an hour ago there was a young lady here also asking for Mr. Ambrose, and you and she—" He trailed off, gazing in amazement at the small young man with longish brown hair standing in front of him. I tried to force a smile on my face. That was my sister. Oh, that explains it, said Mr. Stone, a bright smile ousting the puzzled expression from his face. May I say, sir, that you and she share the most amazing family resemblance? I have often thought so myself. Even your hairstyles are rather similar. It is truly intriguing. Thank you. And what is your name, sir? I bit my tongue. Darn, in my haste to get home, change, and return, I'd completely forgotten that, as a man, I could hardly go by the name of Lillian. My mind was as blank as the walls of Mr. Ambrose's office as I tried to think of a name, any name, that I could tell Mr. Stone. Finally, my thoughts landed on the royal family. Victor, I blurted out. Victor Linton. Thank God, when all else failed, one could still rely on the Queen of England. Very well, Mr. Linton. Wait a moment, please, while I see if Mr. Ambrose is ready to receive you. He took up the metal horn from the desk and spoke into it. Mr. Ambrose, Mr. Linton to see you. In response, there came only silence from the other end. Mr. Ambrose, are you there? Now, there did come a noise from the other end. It sounded like something between a moan from a medieval torture chamber and the growl of a wounded Siberian tiger. Mr. Ambrose, sir, are you all right? Apparently, Mr. Ambrose was all right, because he started to speak a few seconds later. I couldn't make out what he was saying, and part of me was glad for that. Stone nodded, put down the horn, and then looked up at me, smiling. Mr. Linton, he said, I've been informed that you have been accepted as Mr. Simmons' replacement and are now a member of the staff. May I take this opportunity to welcome you? He got up, walked around the desk, held out a hand for me to shake. Hesitantly, I reached out. I had never shaken a man's hand before, only curtsied. Would he be able to tell that I was a woman by a handshake? Determined not to give him any clues, I resolved to make my grip convincingly strong and masculine. Ouch! Mr. Stone grimaced. All right, maybe I had overdone it with the masculinity. Yes, welcome, as I said. Now, where was I? Cautiously, he removed his hand from my grip and flexed his fingers. Yes. Mr. Ambrose regrets to inform you that he does not have time to receive you right now, since urgent business detains him. He wishes you to go directly into the secretary's office and wait for further instructions there. I frowned. Urgent business that detains him? What business could be so urgent that he couldn't receive his private secretary? It should be my job to help him with his urgent business, shouldn't it? But orders were orders, and though I usually wasn't very good at obeying orders, these were different. Unlike my aunt, Mr. Ambrose would have to pay me for bossing me around. So I simply asked, the secretary's office. With his thumb, Mr. Stone indicated a door to the right of his desk. That door over there. I hope you find everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Linton. If there is anything I can help you with, please don't hesitate to ask. Wow, if all of my new colleagues were like this, working for a living would actually be a piece of cake. Maybe even a chocolate cake with extra sugar. Then I remembered my new employer and reconsidered. No, not a piece of cake. Definitely not. A piece of granite might be an appropriate description. I walked over to the door Mr. Stone had indicated. I reached for the doorknob. I grasped and turned it, holding my breath. With a low click, the door swung open. Nervously, I peered into my new domain. The room was just as I might have expected. Bare stone walls, heavy curtains, a large desk. It looked like a smaller version of Mr. Ambrose's office, except that here the desk stood against the wall, and much of the space was taken up by enormous shelves holding large, differently colored boxes. They all had numbers and letters written on them. Good gosh, what was this? Seeing these vast mountain of papers, it occurred to me that for the first time to wonder what the duties of a private secretary would actually be. Ever since my discovery of his wealth, I expected for Mr. Ambrose to be a rich landowner, and that as his secretary I would maybe have to write a few letters for him when he was too lazy to do it himself. But apparently he wrote and received a heck of a lot more than just a few letters. I was in for more than I had bargained for. Tiptoeing over to one of the boxes, I could see under the cryptic message 29V118. The explanation, George G.R. Spiffing. Who was George G.R.? Sounded foreign. He had to be a most dedicated letter writer, though. I reached out to open the box, then hesitated. But why not? After all, I was his secretary now. I would have to look through most of these sooner or later. Yes, that was an excellent excuse. Much better than I'm just nosy. I opened the box and took out a few papers. What I found made me feel even more puzzled. They weren't letters. They were maps, drawings of mountains with short annotations about such things as rockers, nuggets, and a whole lot of other things. I had never heard of it in my life. Mystified, I put the papers back into the box and put it back on the shelf. Then it occurred to me, why was I still waiting? Why had Mr. Rich and Mysterious not called me yet to assist him in his oh-so-urgent business? I wanted to step out from between the shelves, but before I could do so, I noticed a door behind them. From the layout of the room, I supposed it to be connection door to Mr. Ambrose's office. I approached it and carefully tried the knob. Locked. Blimey, this was getting on my nerves. But it was up to him to give me work, not the other way around. Having nothing better to do, I strolled over to the window and looked out over the city. As had been evident already from the outside, Empire House was a lot taller than any of the surrounding buildings and provided a stunning view. My office, I felt a thrill go through me at the words. My office faced west, and in the distance I could see the white dome of St. Paul's Cathedral rising over the houses. I waited and waited. Great Paul struck 11, and I still waited. I was just about to leave the room and ask Mr. Stone if anything was wrong, when I heard a strange sizzling noise from the direction of my desk. Eyebrows raised, I went over to investigate. The noise seemed to be coming from within the wall beside my desk. Whoever had put the stone there had done a shoddy job of it, because in the wall directly over my desk was a hole about an inch in diameter. The sizzling noise seemed to originate from there. Curious, I bent forward and put my eye to the hole. I couldn't see anything inside. It was pitch black. But I could hear the sizzling noise getting louder and louder until, ouch! Something poked me in the eye, hard, and I staggered back. I almost fell into my rear end, but managed to grab the edge of my desk and stay upright. Bright lights flashed across my field of vision. I blinked furiously when I could finally see again. I discovered a tiny metal cylinder lying on my desk. Apparently, it had shot out of the hole in the wall and right into my eye. The hole in the wall was separating my office from that of Mr. Rickard Ambrose. I knew where the cylinder came from. Furious, I grabbed the thing and marched towards the door separating my office from his. "Hey!" No answer. "Hey, I want to know why you tried to poke my eye out." Still no answer. I banged on the door with the hand holding the metal cylinder, and as I did, it fell out of my hand and onto the floor, breaking apart into the process. It was hollow. Curious, I leaned forward and saw that there was a tiny piece of paper rolled up in the cylinder. Taking it out, I unrolled it, revealing a few handwritten words in a clear, precise, no-nonsense hand. "Mr. Linton, bring me file 227B, Rickard Ambrose." Bring me file 227B? Just bring me file 227B? That was all? No, please, no, thank you. Gosh, why did he even feel the need to sign it? No one else I know would write a message that cold, curt, and discourteous. Well, maybe my uncle, but discourteous from family didn't count. And Mr. Linton, he couldn't even acknowledge the fact that I was a female when there was nobody else around. I had been afraid he was a chauvinist. I had been wrong. He was the king of chauvinists. But he was also the man who wrote my paychecks, so I swallowed the adjectives I would have liked to throw at him and instead demanded of the closed door, "Why are we communicating via tiny paper rolls? And what is file 227B? No answer. Though he must have heard me through the door, the man didn't say a single word, but shortly after, a plink noise came from behind me, and I turned around only to see another missive from my master shooting out the hole in the wall. Stomping over to the desk, I grabbed it and read, "Mr. Linton, we are communicating via tiny paper rolls because this is the most efficient system of communication, and you should be able to find a file on your own if you want to keep your position. Rickard Ambrose." Most efficient form of communication, my foot. The cash-carrying bit faker just didn't want to talk to me and be reminded that he suffered from the shame of having a girl as his secretary. Well, two could play at this game. I started to rummage through my desk, opening and shutting drawers at a prodigious rate. Finally, I found what I was looking for. In the bottom drawer was a bowl full of metal cylinders and another one full of little bits of paper. I took both out, grabbed the fountain pen that was lying on the desk, and began to scribble. "Dear Mr. Ambrose, may I ask with all due politeness what kind of devilish invention this is you're forcing me to use?" Thoughtfully, I tapped my lower lip with the pen. Then I closed the message with, "I remain, sincerely yours, Miss Lily Linton." Yes, show him that a proper girl can be courteous, even if a stinking rich man cannot. Very pleased with myself, I put the cylinder in the hole in the wall. It didn't move. Frowning, I examined the hole more closely and then discovered a little lever right beside it. Well, it couldn't hurt to try, probably. Cautiously, my finger curled around the lever. Hoping fervently it wouldn't make the building explode or something like that, I pulled. There was a sucking noise, and the little metal container vanished into the hole. Phew! I hated mechanical stuff. You never know what would happen when you pushed a button. For a minute or two, I sat at my desk, twiddling my thumbs, but I didn't have to wait long for a reply. With another plink, the metal missive container shot out of the hole and landed on my desk. I grabbed it eagerly and unrolled the message. Ha! At least this time he would have to be more courteous. He would have to accept me as a girl, wouldn't he? I read. Mr. Linton, this devilish invention, as you deem it, is the latest technical invention for high-speed communication called pneumatic tubes. It allows me to communicate with all my employees in the entire building without leaving my office. This system has served me admirably ever since its installation. I would be required to change my modus operandi in order to communicate with you vocally. That will not happen. I do not change a working system. Bring me file 227B. And, incidentally, I do not want you as mine, sincerely or otherwise. Richard Ambrose. My eyes went wide as I read the last line before his name. The abominable villainous. That had just been a courteous closing line, nothing more. It hadn't meant that. Well, I hadn't meant anything like the thing he obviously meant. Seething with rage, I grabbed another piece of paper and scribbled, Dear Mr. Ambrose, I am a female in case you still have not noticed. How am I to give you file, whatever it's called, if you do not open your bloody door? Yours, infuriatingly, Miss Lily Linton. The reply came soon. Mr. Linton, you are no female while you are in my employ, as, by the way, you have amply proven by your language. Slide the file under the door. Richard Ambrose. What? Now he complained about not expressing myself in a ladylike manner, after he had forced me to come to work dressed up in a pair of striped trousers. I itched to send back another snarky reply. But this man was my master now. He was the one who would hopefully one day sign my first paycheck. He was my ticket to freedom. My only chance. Blast him. I hurried over to the shelves and held the boxes. 2 minutes of searching were enough for me to discover that whatever system my predecessor used to sort his files, it most certainly was not an alphabetical one. 2 minutes of searching went by, and I still hadn't discovered what I was looking for. As I was taking an extraordinarily large and heavy box from one of the upper shelves, I heard a familiar plink from my desk. Balancing the monument of file container on my shoulder, I tottered over to my desk, picked up the metal cylinder with one hand, opened it with my teeth, and spat the removed half into the bowl on my desk. The message fell onto my desk, still using only my free hand. I picked it up and unrolled it laboriously. On the paper were written 2 neat, concise words. Hurry up. Oh, thank you, I shouted at the closed door to Mr. Ambrose's office. Thank you so very much. With a grunt, I deposited the gigantic box on my desk and began to look through it. After 10 more minutes of ceaseless searching, I raised my head from the dusty intestines of box 37XV227, holding my trophy aloft. Yes! Now that I had invested so much trouble into finding it, I couldn't help but wondering what file 227B actually was. I took a quick peep, only to be confronted by endless columns of meaningless numbers. This was what I had spent half an hour of my precious life on? Who cared what was in it? What mattered was that I'd found it, finally. Triumphantly, I marched to Mr. Ambrose's door, knocked, and shoved the thin file under the door. On the other side, I could hear the scrape of a chair being moved and then footsteps. And oh, what footsteps they were. Only Mr. Ambrose could manage to make his steps sound cool and disinterested. I didn't want to listen for more, though. Right now I was so exhausted that I didn't care what he did with the bloody file. I just went to my desk, collapsed into my chair, and closed my eyes and breathed a deep sigh of relief. A plink came from the wall, made me open my eyes again. Frowning, I picked up the metal cylinder and opened it. What now? Be quicker next time. Richard Ambrose. For a moment I could hardly believe the words in front of my eyes, but only for a moment. Then I saw red. Fuming, I grabbed my fountain pen and composed the following message in my best chicken scratch. Dear Mr. Ambrose, if you want me to be quicker at finding your files, maybe you should explain the sorting system to me. Yours, as your secretary, whether you like it or not, Lily Linton. I stuffed into the tube and pulled the lever. The reply came only a minute later. Mr. Linton, if you are not able to comprehend a perfectly logical system of sorting files, then what makes you think you are suitable for the position of private secretary? Maybe you should resign. Richard Ambrose. Ha! You would just love that, wouldn't you? And what perfectly logical? So far, nothing I'd seen of the supposed system was perfectly logical. Rather, perfectly chaotic. How could anyone figure it out by themselves? Fear suddenly laced through my heart. What if he sacked me? The possibility hadn't occurred to me until now, because he had promised to give me the job and could not break his word. But knowing the kind of man he was, I doubted very much he would still feel honor-bound to keep me if I didn't come up to scratch. On the contrary, he would probably be delighted to throw me out at the first opportunity. Resolving then and there not to give him the satisfaction, I got up and plunged myself into the jungle that was Mr. Simmons' filing system. When the next message landed with a blink on my desk, I sat there awaiting it with a serene smile. With a flourish, I opened the message container and studied the message inside. Mr. Linton, bring me file 146K. Be quicker this time. Richard Ambrose. I got up, walked over to one of the shelves, took out a box, opened it, took out file 146K, closed the box again, put it back on the shelf, walked to the door with the file in hand and slid it through the slit between door and floor. Then I knocked at the door and purred. Your file, sir. I heard him getting up and, without a word, taking it from the door. All the while I stood leaning against the door, my ear pressed to the wood, grinning like an idiot and feeling like a genius. This time nothing came out of the hole in the wall. No message, no complaint, no scolding note. I did a little happy dance in the middle of the room. Yea, he had nothing to complain about. And I bet the fact was riling him up good and proper. Not long after both files were returned in the same manner, I had forwarded them. Attached to the top was a note. Mr. Linton, bring me file 188Q. Not a word about being quicker. If that was at all possible, my grin widened a little bit more. Quickly, I scurried over the shelves and, after depositing the return files in the correct place, went to the next box and got him the wished-for documents. The following hours passed in a whirl of fetching and returning files and curt little notes exchanged via the pneumatic tubes. If he actually read half the files I fetched for him, I'd eat my uncle's big top hat. He seemed determined to make me mess up, to pressure me so that he would be able to find some fault with me and have an excuse to sack me. And in every single note he sent, He kept calling me Mr. Linton, but I didn't let him get to me. I ran between the door and the shelves like a prize racehorse, fetching each file in record time. The filing system had taken some time to figure out, but it wasn't that difficult really once you had taken a moment to think about it. The first two numbers on the box stood for years. 37, for example, stood, or so I assumed, for 1837. The letters behind that were really Roman numerals, numbering the boxes related to that particular year, and the number behind that signified the place of the box and the overall order of the boxes within the room. It was really simple to find a file once you noticed that the file number related to the last year. You simply had to run along the shelves until you reached the right one. Wasn't I a smart girl? With a self-satisfied grin, I pushed the 52nd file under the door and returned to my desk to wait for the inevitable note. In spite of my success, I couldn't really say I was looking forward to the next note. Every time I read the greeting line, Mr. Linton, I could almost feel the sparks flying out of my eyes. The arrogant son of a bachelor was completely trying to ignore the fact that I was a girl. The fact that he was the best-looking man I'd ever seen in my life didn't do much to sweeten that fact. Why was he so determined to ignore me? Was it that he could not stand the idea of a girl in his employ, or was it me? So what if it is you? I asked myself. That's no problem, is it? It's not like you want to be noticed by him. Right, I had to remember that. It really didn't matter as who or what he thought of me. Just that he gave me my salary and independence. But I wanted independence as a female, not independence as some cheap imitation of a man. I crossed my arms. That was it. I didn't want to be noticed by him in the way a girl wanted to be normally noticed by a man at all. All that romantic crap and so forth. No, definitely not that, I told myself fervently. What I wanted was far harder. I wanted recognition. I wanted respect. And I was going to get it, even if I had to shake it out of him. He couldn't avoid me forever. At the end of the day, he would have to come out of hiding, leave his office, and then I could confront him. Or so I thought. About 2 hours later, when a long time had gone by without any misses from his mightiness, and I was just beginning to wonder whether perhaps he might have choked on one of his files, somebody knocked at my office door, the one to the hallway, not to Mr. Ambrose's office. Surprised, I looked up. I was certainly not used to people knocking at my door, as if they could disturb me doing something important. As if I were somebody important. Come in, I called. Mr. Stone poked his head in. Mr. Linton, are you busy? No. I quickly sat up straight and tried to look very professionally secretarial. Come in, please. Thank you. Smiling his cautious smile, Mr. Stone entered. I just came to give you a message. Mr. Ambrose has sent me to inform you that he has gone out on urgent business and that he will not require your services for the rest of the day. I sat there dumbstruck. Could this be what I thought it was? Could he actually have cut his day short in order to avoid seeing me? Why would he go to such abnormal lengths to avoid me? Was it such a blot on his honor to have a female for a secretary? Anger boiling up inside me, I stomped past the startled Mr. Stone, went down the stairs, and left the building, determining there and then not to let Mr. Haughty, almighty, and annoying handsome Mr. Ambrose slip through my fingers tomorrow. He would have to accept me or choke on the fact of my femininity. Disconsolately, I wandered home through the dusky streets of London, when every now and again couples passed me and I saw a smile on the lady's face that showed she was infuriatingly happy with her miserable lot in life. As an inferior to chauvinist, I couldn't help but glower at her. The man who accompanied the woman nearly always noticed, drawing a protective arm around his charge and glowering just as fiercely back at the stranger. Chauvinism. Pure chauvinism. Wherever you looked. Since there were a lot of people out on the street and I had a lot of glowering to do, I didn't reach home for about an hour. When I finally turned the last corner and saw my uncle's house, my eyes went wide in shock. The door to the house was wide open. Anxious, excited voices were calling out inside, and there was a large carriage right in front of the door. My uncle didn't own a carriage. Gripped by apprehension, I started to run. What the heck was going on in there? Alright, so that's the end of chapter 7, File Fight. And I don't remember. Okay, so some of the chapters have footnotes, some of them don't, but I'm just going to say that's at the end of every chapter so that you know. Basically, if it does have footnotes, I wasn't going to read them during the book because I think it would make it a little bit more choppy. So if you want to read the footnotes with historical content and context, because Robert Thier is a historian, then you can read these on Wattpad, or you can read these on Radish Fiction, or you can buy the book on Amazon or Kindle, which I think is still through Amazon, maybe. So that's the end of chapter 7.